Assalamu alaikum. Masa al-khair jami'an. Good evening, everyone. In behalf of Bahrain MSMEs Society and United Nations International Organization, UNISMO, I'd like to welcome you and welcome the participants today from all over the world. My name is Raed Al-Mubarak, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm the Director of Training and Conferences at Bahrain MSMEs. Hopefully, to get benefit from this event, which will start in a few minutes, and it will end by 6:40, hopefully, in Bahrain time. Our program will start today by welcoming speech by Dr. Abdel Hassan Al-Deri, Chairman of Bahrain MSMEs and General Secretary of UNISMO, followed by a speech by His Excellency Ambassador Tawfiq Al-Mansour, Assistant Under Secretary for Consular and Administrative Affairs at Ministry of Foreign. The dialogue will be starting after that and will include experts from the West and all around the world. And we will be with you during the Q&A sessions. At the end of the program, there will be recommendations and closing remarks will be hosted by Dr. Abdel Hassan. Let's welcome Dr. Abdel Hassan Al-Deri, Chairman of Bahrain MSMEs Society, to have his speech. Let's welcome him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Your Excellencies, our distinguished speakers, honorable guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good evening worldwide, and welcome to our 9th International UN MSMEs Day Conference 2021. I'll be speaking for a minute in Arabic and then switch to English, so bear with me. الأخوة والأخوات، السيدات والسادة المشاركين في مؤتمرنا السنوي التاسع لقمة اليوم العالمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة 2021 بعنوان أهمية التحول الرقمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة في ظل جائحة كورونا. أرحب بكم في اليوم الثاني من هذه القمة الهامة التي تنطلق من مملكة البحرين. السلام عليكم جميعا، وأسعد الله مساءكم بكل خير، ويسعدني ويشرفني أن أرحب بكم في اليوم الثاني من المؤتمر السنوي التاسع لقمة اليوم العالمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة 2021، والذي يتم تنظيمه هذا العام بالتعاون مع الاتحاد العالمي لمنظمات المؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة اليونيزمو، مستذكرا بكل الفخر والاعتزاز الجهود الحثيثة التي بذلها سعادة الأخ عبد النبي بن عبد الله الشعلة رئيس اليونيزمو ورئيس اللجنة العليا المنظمة للمؤتمر طيلة الشهور الماضية. ولا يفوتني أن أتقدم بجزيل الشكر والتقدير لوزير الصناعة والتجارة والسياحة سعادة الأخ زايد بن راشد الزياني لدعمه المتواصل لمؤتمرنا هذا ومشاركته يوم أمس خلال حفل الافتتاح كمتحدث رئيسي في جلسة الحوار الوزارية بعنوان دور الحكومات في دعم التحول الرقمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة، والتي ضمت أيضا وزراء المؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة في كل من جمهورية الهند الصديقة ودولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة الشقيقة، ولهم كل الشكر والتقدير. وكذلك الشكر موصول لسعادة وزير الخارجية الدكتور عبد اللطيف بن راشد الزياني لإنابته وكيل الوزارة للشؤون القنصلية والإدارية سعادة السفير توفيق المنصور للمشاركة معنا في هذا اليوم نيابة عنه بإلقاء الكلمة الافتتاحية للمؤتمر في هذا اليوم. كما ولا يفوتني أتقدم بالشكر إلى القائم بأعمال المنسق المقيم لمكتب الأمم المتحدة في البحرين سعادة السفير محمد الزرقاني، وكذلك الممثل المقيم لبرنامج الأمم المتحدة الإنمائي في البحرين سعادة السفير ستيفانو بيتيناتو، وجميع المتحدثين والمشاركين سواء في اليوم الأول أو اليوم الثاني. وأخص بالشكر الرعاة والجهات الداعمة للمؤتمر، وكذلك الإخوة والأخوات أعضاء اللجنة العليا واللجنة المنظمة للمؤتمر الذين أعطوا من وقتهم الكثير وبذلوا الجهود الحثيثة لإخراج المؤتمر على أكمل وجه. والآن اسمحوا لي التحدث باللغة الإنجليزية لوجود الكثير من المشاركين حول أنحاء العالم من غير الناطقين باللغة العربية. Your Excellencies, our distinguished speakers, honorable guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good evening worldwide, and welcome to our 9th International UN MSMEs Day Conference 2021, and it is in its second day. We'll be having the second session of the conference, where we'll be having UN and international agencies to talk deliberately about the role of the UN and international agencies in supporting the MSMEs and the digitalization and the digital transformation process. Bahrain SME Society is proud to organize its 9th International UN MSMEs Day Summit this year in cooperation with the United International SMEs Organization, UNISMO, and with participation of valuable expertise from Bahrain and abroad. Due to the pandemic, we continue organizing our annual conference online for the second consecutive year and pray that the pandemic ends soon worldwide. We decided to devote our conference this year to discuss various support programs and tools to help the MSMEs in the digital transformation process during and post the pandemic. Our distinguished speakers from the government, private sector, and the private sector, from the UN and the international agencies will be discussing and debating the best practices worldwide that enable the MSMEs to benefit from the digitalization of their operations in order to cope with the pandemic and also to foster their productivity. My country, Bahrain, decided to continue its various financial support schemes that started last year in order to cope with the pandemic and ensure the business continuity of all sectors. We commend such efforts and appreciate more continuous support to cope with the pandemic and sustain the business post the pandemic, as it's expected to face an economic crisis once the pandemic is over. So we call upon the governments, UN agencies, and representatives of the private sector worldwide to prepare for a collective contingency plan to face the expected economic crisis and prevent the closure of many business entities, especially the micro and small enterprises, MSEs, as they are the first to face the hit. Ladies and gentlemen, we are thankful to the UN for declaring the 27th of June as an International UN Day for the MSMEs, as they are deemed to be the backbone of the national economy of any country. According to the International Labour Organization, ILO's recent report on the SMEs' resilience during this worldwide crisis, it says, the COVID-19 pandemic will have a strong effect on labor markets worldwide, especially in developing economies, where more than 70% of the workforce is in self-employment or works in micro and small enterprises. Most MSMEs in developing countries, the smallest often, are run by women, operate in saturated sectors in the informal economy, and most lack social protection. MSMEs will therefore be the first to suffer devastating consequences of the economic downturn. Restarting the economy and creating jobs will be key once the immediate health crisis is over. About post-crisis recovery, it says, what we know about how economic react to health crisis, what this means for MSMEs, and what comes after. The COVID-19 health crisis and the associated measures of confinement will have devastating consequences for micro and small business operations and will disrupt many existing value chains. This in turn will lead to loss of income and sharp increase in unemployment. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 imposed new conditions which led to new systems and innovative solutions to accelerate and advance various manufacturing means. It is very important to join efforts between the public and the private sectors for collective measures and means to support the national economy of any country, especially the MSME sector during the pandemic, using innovative measures and contemporary methods. And at this International MSME Summit today, we urge for a public-private partnership initiatives in the field of technology, innovation, and digital transformation for creating a synergy of every effort to help sustain the MSMEs and the wider economy worldwide. Finally, I would like to say that the MSMEs are important for the economy and their importance is increasing during such pandemic. So the future is for the MSMEs. However, all efforts are needed to strengthen such sector in order to help play its role in the diversification and prosperity of the economy. Thank you very much. وختاما لا يسعني إلا أن أتقدم بجزيل الشكر والعرفان لكل من ساهم في إنجاح هذا الملتقى بالإعداد والتنظيم والحضور والمشاركة، مكررا شكري وتقديري لكم جميعا ولحسن استماعكم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will start our program today by a speech by Your Excellency Mr. Tawfiq, Ambassador Tawfiq Al-Mansour. His Excellency Tawfiq Al-Mansour is the Undersecretary for Consular and Administrative Affairs at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He joined the Ministry of Affairs since 1984 and held different jobs, long-serving and diplomat. He holds a Master in Government Politics from St. John's University in UK and Bachelor's in Law from University of Cairo. His Excellency, Your Excellency, welcome to the board, and you have the floor to have your valuable speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to represent His Excellency Dr. Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain, at this important conference, and take this opportunity to convey to you the greetings of His Excellency together with his best wishes for the success of the summit. I'm also pleased to participate in this high-level conference held in accordance with the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 71/279 in order to raise awareness of the contribution that small business make to sustainable, inclusive, and resilient economic growth and share prosperity for all micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. We are in the midst of an characterized by rapid changes and by the effective of global pandemic in particular, resulting in an unprecedented capacity to affect all of us. Thus, the pandemic has crossed borders rapidly with the ease. Hence, the threats we face today are not unique to any of us. They are common across the globe, and none of our countries is immune. Today's challenges can therefore only be addressed by broad, deep, and sustained global cooperation in which our actions are well understood. Forging genuine partnership between the United Nations and other countries is essential to addressing the global challenges and can be a genuine two-way street with clear benefits being delivered to both sides. As an organization that has been dealing with multinational issues, the UN and its agencies have a wealth of experience to establish such partnership. As we all know, the development of micro, small and medium enterprises, MSMEs, has been recognized the world over as an effective mechanism to facilitate economic development. For its MSMEs sector, which has the highest capital employment ratio, and it is the sector which provides opportunity for young unemployed people to exhibit their entrepreneurship potential by being job creator rather than job seekers. Digitalization supports the growth of micro, small, and medium enterprises business by simplifying business operations, increase sales, and reduce cost. Considering that the promotion of entrepreneurship is a key of customer growth and a primary engine of countries' wealth, many governments of development countries in transition have renewed their focus on this vital factor of production. To achieve this lasting and transformative challenging through innovative research-based technology should be adopted. As the first GCC member to begin diversification efforts, Bahrain is indicative of ongoing journey to the digitalization. The pandemic has acted as catalyst for digital and for transformation. The road to recovery post-COVID-19 is through digitalization, which is aspiration of the Kingdom of Bahrain for building full digital Bahrain economy. Ladies and gentlemen, recognizing the close link between digitalization of MSCs and development in Bahrain and across the world as a whole, Bahrain reformed its commitment to digitalization and assert the importance of reinforcing international efforts. From our perspective in the Kingdom of Bahrain, we fully recognize the outstanding potential of our relations with the United Nations and its agencies, and the many areas in which we can clearly complement each other to our great mutual advantage. In closing, therefore, I want to reiterate Bahrain believe in our conviction that our shared potential and values constitute unique opportunity to build strong cooperation towards development and prosperity. Finally, and in wishing every success, I assure you of the Kingdom of Bahrain continue full and strong support for digitalization and internationalization of MSMEs. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And it's a really valuable speech today. And as we are talking today, we have different technology. We are, just to mention, we are broadcasting through the Zoom, through the YouTube, through the Facebook, through the Instagram, and we have different different technologies. It will be as a challenge for us. So I leave this one now to Dr. Abdullah Sada. Dr. Abdullah Sada is a Deputy CEO of Bahrain Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and he will be chairing the next session, which will take about 1 hour and 50 minutes for a Q&A. Dr. Abdullah, the mic with you. You can start, and we will have a brief about the speakers. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon from Bahrain, sunny Bahrain at this time, the very peaceful and welcoming country. Well, I'm honored to moderate this session with a great list of panelists. Just some logistical matters, so we have 1 hour to start with it for the questions and discussions, and then we'll have a session for the Q&A. At the beginning, I will let each panelist introduce themselves over 3 minutes to introduce themselves and introduce their organization and the role they play in their organization. And then we'll get into the questions and we'll take a turn in relation to the questions. And then if anybody else has something to add, they just have to raise their hand so they can add any point they have. We will start alphabetically. So we have at the beginning, Mr. Gregory Bird. Please, if you can, Mr. Gregory Bird is the Deputy Secretary General of GCEL. If you please can provide a brief about yourself and your organization and your role.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Mr. Moderator had indicated, my name is Gregory Bird. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of GCEL. GCEL is a Swiss-based public-private partnership whose members and supporters include nearly 150 countries, 30 IGOs, NGOs, and the world's leading finance, technology, and insurance firms. These organizations have come together to deploy a global digital economy platform of e-finance, e-insurance, e-commerce, and e-logistics to defragment the fragmented global B2B marketplace, and by putting new free of cost apps at the fingertips of the SMEs to conduct their business transactions globally around the world, just like the entertainment and communication apps that we use today. By way of additional background, I've spent nearly 45 years of my international career as an executive with the world's largest firms in technology and in supply chain, including Arthur Andersen, Accenture, and DHL, and have been and visited over the last 5 years, nearly 50 countries. And our organization has identified from the SMEs what are the digital tools that they demand in order to become more competitive in the global marketplace. And I'll be glad to explain further during my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. What a wealth of experience and services your company provide. Well, you all know how important the digitalization is, and we're really honored to have these panelists here with their experience. Then we'll move to Dr. James Philby, if please can provide a brief about yourself and your company.
Thank you. My name is James Philby, and I'm a lawyer with the U.S. Department of Commerce Commercial Law Development Program. And the mission of the Commercial Law Development Program is to improve the legal environment for doing business worldwide. We spend a lot of time from government to government assistance, technical assistance related to commercial law and what we can do in order to support the development of MSMEs and other business from country to country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. James. Then we have Dr. Hashim Hussein, which I think deputized here by Mr. Afif Barhoumi, which is a familiar face here in Bahrain. Mr. Afif, please.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Dr. Hashim doesn't feel too well, so with Corona around the world, people tend to run away from being around. So what I'll be representing, I'm representing the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, the Investment and Technology Promotion Office of UNIDO, which has been set up in Bahrain since 1996. And our main duty is to work on promoting investment, foreign investment to Bahrain, the region, and mainly sub-Saharan Africa and developing countries. And at the same time, during the years, we started developing domestic investment components, promoting entrepreneurship in Bahrain, and then we developed our own modality, and then which was replicated today in 52 countries around the world, from Uruguay, Africa, China, India, and so forth. So we're into entrepreneurship, SME development, women empowerment, and I'll leave it at this point, Dr. Abdullah, and then we'll discuss more during the questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Afif. Then we move next to Dr. Sandrine Kergroch. Forgive me if I pronounce your name in any wrong way.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the United International SME Organization and the Bahrain SME Society for inviting me to participate in this discussion, especially that you adjusted the agenda for me. So I'm very thankful. So my name is Sandrine Kergroch. I'm the head of SME and Entrepreneurship Performance Policy and Mainstreaming Unit at the OECD. So the OECD is an international organization that bring together government across 38 countries to discuss about common challenges, common issues, and to try to find solutions together, share experiences, identify the best practices that could help government to promote better policy for better lives. So we have 38 member countries, but we work with over 100 non-member countries from across the world. And concretely, what we do, we support an international dialogue and we provide the evidence for. So we monitor trends, we collect data, we analyze these trends and this data, and we try to investigate the pattern in different policy domains that are relevant actually for the SME digital transformation. And more specifically, the Center for Entrepreneurship SME Regions Entity, where I am from, work more specifically on two different aspects, which are on one side the SMEs and the entrepreneurs, and on the other side the places, the regions, the city and the local community. And we bring together these two policy domains to help governments to some extent get the SME policy and business framework right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the information you provided. You know, while everybody depends on the OECD for their information and the reports to go forward. Thank you. Then we'll move next to Mr. Stefano Pettinato.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah, and thank you to the organizers, SME Society and UNISMO. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Stefano Pettinato. I'm the representative of the United Nations Development Program based in Bahrain. The UNDP, for those who don't know, it's one of the largest United Nations agencies globally, We have presence in 170 countries, and our mandate is diverse because it's the UN Development Agency. So by definition, development and its complexities require coordination, integration of actions, systemic approach to problems and challenges. So we span from sustainable energy to gender equality, working a lot with youth. And here in Bahrain in particular, we emphasize a lot the work with youth and public administration, capacity development, and sustainable energy, which is a very large project that we have here in UNDP, and more to come. So again, thank you very much for the organizers. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah.
Thank you, Mr. Stefano. What a broad mandate you have. And last we have, but not least, and with a great experience, Ms. Louisa Tomar, which is the Global Program Officer at the Center for International Private Enterprise.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. My name is Louisa Tomar. I'm a Global Program Officer at the Center for International Private Enterprise site. And many thanks to the Bahrain SME Society and UNISMO for including me in this very timely event. And I'm delighted to be part of this very distinguished panel. CEP works at the intersection of economic and democratic development, and our work is very much driven by local partner demand. Our partners represent local business communities across the globe, such as chambers of commerce, SMEs, economic think tanks, and we are currently carrying out projects in over 50 countries, from Ethiopia to Papua New Guinea, from Peru to Yemen to Ukraine, and many more. CEP is a core institute of the National Endowment for Democracy and also an international affiliate of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I run CEP's digital economy portfolio, and we've been doing this work since 2018, when we began trying to build the capacity of our local partners to engage in the policy advocacy process around digital transformation. And we focused on 4 key topics with them. So data privacy and protection, consumer protection, cybersecurity, and electronic transactions, including e-payments. Our work has now evolved quite a bit, especially in response to COVID, and I look forward to contributing to this conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Louisa, for the work you do and the details you provided. Really great wealth of experience here and diverse panel. So let me start with, I'm a fan of data, so let's start with some data from the OECD and some background. Can you please shed some light on relation to how ready SMEs, MSMEs for digitalization from your perspective? So, Dr. Sandrine, if you can shed some light in relation to some data and information about and awareness in relation to how ready MSMEs in relation to digitalization.
Okay, there may be a misunderstanding because I've been said that I didn't need any slide, and I will be having a discussion with questions. So if you want, I can provide you a bit my insights on so what is your question? Sorry.
Well, and from your perspective, yes, how ready SMEs for digitalization?
We have done a work a couple of months ago about the digital transformation of SMEs. Mm-hmm. And what it has emerged from this work is that not all SMEs have the internal capacity to undertake this transformation. Basically, before the crisis, there were large SME digital gaps. The smaller, the less likely they were to adopt new technology. And this is a constant trend across all sorts of technology, from the less sophisticated to the more sophisticated. But gaps tend to enlarge as technology become more sophisticated. And these gaps are also more pronounced in some sectors than others. For instance, you can see larger gap between IT services or financial services that are more knowledge intensive, and some other sectors like retail trade or construction that are much less intensive. What these gaps are related to, actually, it's a broad range of factors that are explaining this lag, this SME lag in the digital transition. These are gaps in terms of awareness. They are not always aware of the type of technology and the benefits that this technology could bring them. They do not have the skills to either identify this technology or implement this technology into their business practices, their business model, and their firms. Sometimes the manager himself do not have the skills to take the decisions that are needed, and the worker do not have the skills to work with this technology. There is also a data culture gap, meaning that all SMEs are not aware that now the new goal is data, and they need to take advantage of their own data, protect their data, and make greater use of this data. These gaps are also related to access to finance, the constraints they can face when they try to access finance, because of course they need funding to invest in new technology, but they also need funding to invest in the complementary changes in investment needed for implementation. I'm thinking, for instance, as I said, to retraining the workers, but also to the changes that are needed in the organization or in business models. And last but not least, there are gaps in the technology, the data, and the processes that are already at hand, and their capacity to connect to knowledge networks, meaning capacity, for instance, to connect to digital service providers. So what has emerged from this work we've done on the digital transformation of SME? First, that the entry point for the small firms usually are related to the digitalization of marketing and administrative function. Why? Because we can see smaller gaps between small firms and large firms when it comes to, for instance, e-invoicing, using social media, selling online, or interacting with the government. Here, what we can say is that the first step are the more difficult, because once an initial transition is made to digital technology, then there are strong complementarity in other technology, in the use of other technologies that can then speed the transformation. And to make this step, this first step, that is the more difficult, SME tend to leverage on external systems, external support, external advice. So to give you an example, they tend, for instance, if they want to move to artificial intelligence, which is quite sophisticated, they can turn towards the digital service provider that integrate artificial intelligence into their services, into their platform. And then the SME become user of artificial intelligence without knowing it is actually using this technology. So this was a bit the story before this crisis. What the COVID crisis changed? This digital gap remains. They are still there. The crisis has given a very strong push to SMEs to go digital online to survive. But then this pre-existing challenge remains. And then there are new ones that have emerged as well. SME, for instance, has revealed high vulnerabilities to digital security risks. Why? Because they were much more exposed to hackers, being not well prepared to face very sophisticated attacks. And at the same time, the risk of exposure has increased because firms are much more reliant on the digital infrastructure.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sandrine. Mr. Felipe shed some light, since you basically the commercial law development program, is implemented in various countries. So what is your view in relation to the readiness of MSMEs to go with digital transformation, and what is needed to support these SMEs to transform, in addition to what Dr. Sandrine mentioned?
Thank you, Doctor. The process of digitalization can be a blessing, but also a burden on small enterprises. And what my division of the U.S. government does, we work with the Bahraini government to try to figure out what are the legal mechanisms that are going to benefit SMEs the most. I think that SMEs are ready only to the extent that the whole ecosystem is ready. And for Bahrain and many developing countries, there's very important issues in supporting the growth of MSMEs. First of all, working with laws related to government procurement, that they're as transparent and they can assist with subcontracting to smaller enterprises. So small enterprises that have the ability to develop software can be supported with a system of connecting with larger enterprises. And larger enterprises need to be prepared to subcontract with the smaller enterprises. And I think that digitalization can only serve to support that process. It's also very important to have laws related to technology transfer and intellectual property rights for advantage of digitalization and the opportunity to develop software or applications. They need to be able to be protected in terms of if they develop intellectual property through digital realms, that will be protected when that intellectual property is sold in different markets around the world. And then finally, some legal areas that are extremely important related to privacy. There need to be clear laws that medium and micro and small medium enterprises can comply with. I think that we have a tendency to be over-inclusive of privacy requirements, and that's fine if you're a large company that can, have a server that can manage all of these things. But if you're a small enterprise that develops software, the laws need to be clear and not so onerous that the the micro and small and medium-sized enterprise can actually handle.
Well, thank you, Mr. Felipe, for your answer. Well, what I realize from what you mentioned, that the laws need to be, looked at to support the digital transformation and support SMEs, but a crucial element is the demand. Well, there should be some sort of supply chain and connectivity to ensure businesses, the MSMEs, they get some demand and some services, and then create, well, what you would call cash flow, so these businesses can invest in the digital transformation. Ms. Tomar, if you can, highlight from your experience, because you've basically, and your organization, you have worked in various areas, and you have background in data and finance, lending for MSMEs, so well, what is in your view the challenge that MSMEs face, and if you can give a broader perspective from international perspective, really, to know if there are pockets and what has been going other areas for some countries, and they are advanced more than others, and why is that?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. So, one of the things we're seeing in many of the countries where we work is that there's this push to move SMEs online, and it's viewed as sort of this big final process, and that's the main goal. And the reality is that's step one. And so, to Sandrine's point, once you have the SMEs moving online, they need a ton of support, services, digital literacy, access to finance, perhaps they need an improved infrastructure environment. Their access to internet is limited. So we see that they continue to face many different barriers, similar to what they likely experienced offline with their small businesses. I think one of the key focuses of our work is to not only focus on the skills and access piece, but also the policy advocacy piece. The SMEs are best equipped to understand how the enabling environment or lack thereof is making their ability to have sustainable online businesses function. And so it's really important for them to understand how policy interacts with their business and begin to work collaboratively with government to make the reforms needed. One concern that I have or that I've seen is that there can be a really enthusiastic push to get SMEs online or let's say adopt e-payments, whereas their local consumer market is still transacting completely in cash. So the SMEs are preparing for this cross-border trade, which may or may not take place, but now they're sort of a business designed to not meet the immediate needs of the local market. So one of the things that's really important is to make sure that the local consumer market is developing at pace with any efforts to transform the SME community. Some of the other panelists mentioned SMEs that develop software and have new IP, but many of the SMEs we work with, sell basic goods and services. And by basic, I simply mean the ones that have, an immediate demand in their local communities versus, a cross-border trade opportunity or, a new software where you would, sell that globally. So that's one piece, and where we've seen success is really where we've seen government offer opportunity for business to comment on new legislation, to be engaged in dialogue with them, and certainly connect the dots with civil society and the consumer market base to ensure the ecosystem is developed in a coordinated way so that, all the focus is not just on, digitalization for the sake of digitalization, but rather it's meeting the demands as the overall economy goes through digital transformation. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. It's a really, very important list you highlighted. And I think some things cut across various organizations or panels from various organizations we have on this panel. So Mr. Stefano, the role you play as the UN development program, that's a huge role you play with this, especially with the goals, UN goals, trying to encourage organizations to work on. Can you please highlight how the UN and what the UN is doing with governments, basically to ease and support MSMEs to go to digital transformation?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I can speak from the point of view of UNDP. We are not a UN agency that directly is mandated to work with SMEs exclusively. We work with the whole ecosystem within the private sector. And as you say, well, we work hand in hand with our host governments. So that is the entry point. Now, first of all, I mean, we need to distinguish between some environments where, particularly in less developed countries, where the ecosystem is almost non-existent, or where, as Luisa was saying, when there's no market for digitalization, then the enterprise, the small, medium enterprises don't have an incentive to move in that direction. Now, the problem is that in most middle and low income countries, this sector is made up of informal enterprises. You know, that when we say micro, small, medium enterprise, in some country settings, I was working in Central America for 9 years before coming to Bahrain. And what we saw there was an enormous informal sector, which has another array of issues and challenges that we may or may not be aware of, but that's presents a different issue. In Bahrain, if we look at a country like Bahrain instead, we do have a very strong and vibrant SME sector, and we have an ecosystem that is conducive to making the shift towards a more digitalized and digitally intensive SME sector. The transition is happening. UNDP worked with the IGA, with the Information E-Government Authority last year to make a mapping of digitalization for Bahrain, digital transformation in Bahrain. This is ongoing. And what we see is that particularly for SMEs, it turns out that they, and others have mentioned this already, they are the most innovation prone sector, more than larger corporations. They have more flexibility to adapt to changing demand and to adapt to changing technologies that are required. So arguably, these are organizations that have that vibrant element of change and adaptation that could truly help entire economic sectors take off. We have seen this in several countries. And also, they are extremely efficient job creators. So when you see the SME environment in a country take off, you see jobs coming in. And I think that in OECD countries, 70% of jobs are created in SMEs. In Bahrain, I think the figure is 64%, the last one that I've seen. That's a huge number. So when you see COVID hitting SMEs, you see a direct impact on jobs. But at the same time, going from SMEs as victims to SMEs as actors of change, when you strengthen them, you will see a rapid bounce back in the economy. And this is really the key to, and that can be done through more intensity and incentives in digitalization, creating an enabling environment that at the legal level, of course, we'll hear our colleague from at that level, but also at the infrastructural level, you know, 5G and more easier access to digital instruments that can make small and enterprises to get in the economy and to have more access. One thing that I want to say also is, and you mentioned in the beginning, access to data on SMEs. Well, I think that the twist there is also that SMEs need data. They need market data. They need market information, and sometimes they don't get that. And so chambers of commerce in Bahrain Chamber is extremely active in that and provide that market information to SMEs. But in other settings, less fortunate, that's what's missing. So there needs to be a very important role by chambers of commerce, but also ministries of industries and the like to provide that information to these small and medium, sometimes emerging companies. There's a lot more to say, but I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Stefano. Well, if we move to Mr. Afif Barhoumi, because they work closely with MSMEs and the UNIDO, you know, and well, they have a great model they developed while here in Bahrain, and they use it across other countries. Mr. Afif, if you highlight from your perspective, well, and the services that the UNIDO provide to support MSMEs to basically transform into digitalization.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Just in the forefront, you know, achieving the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, and based on the UNCTAD study, the investment gap required to achieve the SDGs is around $2.5 trillion. This is pre-COVID-19. And then we had the fourth industrial revolution, which we are currently living in, which has put some more pressure on achieving the SDGs. And then finally, we got Mr. COVID, who came in and said, you know, it's a new reality, and then these are extra precious. So before COVID, based on the fourth digital revolution, females will lose, from each 5 jobs, females will lose 1 job due to digitalization that was supposed to take 5, 6, 7, 8 years. From the men's side, for every 3 jobs, you will lose 1. With COVID now and the unprecedented disruption on economies all around the world, where things have completely reached to a standstill. No one would ever imagine that you have no flights, you have nothing, you know, happening around the world. There are many, you know, statistics on the digital revolution and COVID and what has changed, but it's a new reality. Entrepreneurs, and we have to be very focused and very, you know, careful in which part of the world we're addressing this issue. If you're looking at the GCC countries, which is 6, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, these are in a better off position than if you look at the Arab region as a whole. The new reality is there. Entrepreneurs have moved swiftly to digitalization, forgetting the physical you know, presence. We've seen so many of our entrepreneurs move quickly to that shift. But then I fall again to what Ms. Louisa was saying. How swift is the ecosystem capable of following through, you know, with this vast changes? In the case of Bahrain, where we are today, Bahrain was extremely fast. Yesterday we heard about the SME platform for financing, so entrepreneurs can go online and look into the different SME financing schemes, and things can be done online. But if you look, you know, 2 or 3, you know, countries away from here, then this does not exist. If you look at, you know, commodities or final products, in Bahrain, the logistical system is there. If you look in other countries in the region, the logistics is not there. The internet speed, the internet quality, the G5 that we live in does not exist in those countries. So accordingly, we're very entrepreneurs, and I know, and I've seen it through our entrepreneurs, entrepreneur resilience was there. And this is why UNIDO in Bahrain, in the first few months of COVID, we decided to start working on ensuring entrepreneurs' resilience. We want them to sustain the current operation they are in, no growth, no future plans, because we're still not sure where we are going and what's going to happen. So we worked a lot on ensuring resilience. And now we started for some time back, moving into the growth. What's going to happen post-COVID? So now we're focusing a lot with entrepreneurs that consider that virtuality is going to be there and it's going to stay there. We never expected, you know, e-commerce will boom in 7 months as it has happened. Even the World Economic Forum never expected this. They said, you know, digitalization will be reached between 5 to 10 years from now. It happened in 6 months. Schools shifted from physical classroom into virtual classroom in 3 to 4 months. And I'm talking about, you know, the well-developed Arab countries or countries in the region. So entrepreneurs had to reconfigure their business models. And I remember we had so many, you know, because we used to do a lot of business counseling and mentorship, physical, one-to-one, face-to-face. We immediately moved to virtual setups, WhatsApp counseling sessions we start to give. And I remember this message from so many of us who said, you know, COVID is created a lot of disruption, but now it helped us focus more on what makes us profit and what makes us generate income and what's a waste of time. So, and I remember one of them said, you know, I'm restructuring the whole company. You know, although I'm at home, but now I'm restructuring. I'm going to stop this. I'm going to develop this. And we tried as much as possible to cope with that. But not all entrepreneurs are fortunate and capable to do that. And this is where we, as UNIDO, we come in and support. Once again, we operate in 52 countries around the world. Some of them are extremely advanced, as China, India, Turkey, and all of these, the Arab region, especially the Gulf region. But we can see a lot of countries in Africa who are still not able to advance, you know, in the digital transformation. I know a lot of entrepreneurs are functioning now online, but still they lack a lot of local ecosystem development, which is an issue. And we're trying as much as possible to do that. Now we provide all our programs online. We have developed a program called Virtual Mentors, which is a group of experts around the world in different fields, different sectors, different countries, who support entrepreneurs in other parts of the world, not specifically in Bahrain, but try to create linkages for them. And you need the entrepreneurs to start to learn from one another, because this challenge is new to everyone. You know, what are the solutions that you adopted that were capable of, you know, reaching your targets that we can share with someone in Ghana or someone in Kenya or somebody in Jordan? I don't know. You know, so there are many disruptions happening. And I think this is a new reality that we have to accept. I don't want to take much time, and we'll leave it for some other question.
Thank you, Mr. Afif. Mr. Bird, you know, well, Mr. Afif talked about, well, transformation and, well, basically, well, it started with the sustainability of companies before they move into, well, growth and development and take an opportunity instead of a challenge of the COVID as a challenge, and trying to transform their businesses and excel in digitalization. Well, your company and what you've been working on basically is supporting companies and helping them to transform. What examples really you've gone through that were astonishing, you know, that took businesses from one place to another, given the challenges that we faced during the COVID?
Sure. I think it's very important to recognize when we talk about digitization is not to continue to exacerbate silo digitization. And this is the challenge that we have right now, because trade is global and countries cannot digitize on their own and businesses can't digitize on their own. They must be digitizing and connecting with their trade partners. So it's a digital ecosystem that's required. And then in terms of, with respect to that, effectively, businesses need new digital tools to operate. But there's two elements here, because I've heard comments that the needs are different in different countries, and absolutely they are. And it's important to recognize, to look at this both from a macroeconomic standpoint and then from a business standpoint at the ground level. Now, from a macro standpoint, we must understand the demographic challenges that are affecting the world today. And we can look at the world, for example, and put it in three categories: high, mid, and low-income countries. Now, 40 years ago, when I used to be with Arthur Andersen Accenture, the high-income countries were 22% of the world's population. They are now 15%. And in the next 40 to 50 years, they will be 11%. The high-income countries are aging. They have low birth rates. They have excess production capacity and not enough demand. What are they going to do? Clone more people? That's not going to happen. Open their borders wider? We know the socio-political issues with that. So the key is for the high-income countries to create new demand, and they cannot create printing more debt, which has been what's been going on. What they need to do is to build the buying power of the mid and low income countries by purchasing products from the low and mid income countries, providing them the tools to do that, and using digital tools to create greater efficiency and transparency to reduce risk, because business is all about risk. When you do that, we'll end up building the buying power of the mid and low income countries by giving them the digital tools in order to conduct their business and trade transactions. And then they will then be able to buy back the high value added goods and services from the neighboring developed countries. This is part of growing the global economic pie, rather than everyone fighting over the size of the same one. The second point is, so the mid and small income countries and the high income countries must adopt digital tools that create greater efficiency and transparency. The second part is to identify what are the tools that the businesses need at the ground level. Now, we recently completed a 4-year case study that collected, it was called the G20 Nations Case Study, 4 years. And this involved 90 G20 government ministries, industry associations, IGOs, NGOs, Deloitte, Frost & Sullivan, and the Nielsen Company. We through face-to-face interviews across every G20 country, every economic zone, across 19 industry clusters, everyone that's involved in the buy-sell, the movement, the financing, the insuring, and the clearance of goods from shelf to shelf. Now, this case study was done in using as a foundation. There are like 6 main factors that the UN, the WTO, the World Bank, and others have identified over the years that for businesses and for economies to grow, we must focus on 6 elements. 1, level of integration, the level of e-documentation, tracking and visibility, processes, competence, and cargo security. So we collected this data face-to-face at the ground level to determine what do the businesses want. And the results were, quite staggering, or maybe not so staggering. 90.4% of the businesses do not have an integrated system. The banking and the insurance industries are the least integrated into the global value chains. No wonder only 5% of the B2B transactions are financed per the Asia Development Bank, or up to 8% per the Bank of International Settlements. And then 94.5% of these B2B participants, representing 80% of the world's GDP, commonly defined the tools that they want to do a better job and to be more competitive. So what's important is then now we need to get them these tools. And the key is that countries cannot digitize on their own because the storage cost, the data center storage costs run into the billions of dollars. And so what you need to do is have a mechanism to deploy that. And as I said in my opening remarks, is that you have a platform, which is e-commerce, e-finance, e-insurance, and logistics, because they all fit together. And I think it was mentioned, yes, marketing and e-commerce is the start, but the business also needs to get the financing. They need to find the logistics. They need to get the insurance, and they don't want to be inputting data into separate portals and having to make phone calls around the world trying to find out. And so what happens is, by doing it in this way, we get really huge, big amounts of data that we can validate between the various parties within the supply chain, and then businesses can trade with trust. So then what we did is we took this study and we presented it to the world's largest information technology firms. They have built the world's government systems. They have built the world's banking, manufacturing, insurance, supply chain systems. And they recognize they can't deploy such a platform alone due to geopolitical and monopolistic concerns. The world will not allow, due to data privacy and security, one organization to control it. But they've agreed to come together under one roof to basically take the modules that they've successfully built for the large companies over the last 50 years and convert these into free of cost digital apps that now businesses can use to communicate and exchange information to plan, manage, and execute their transactions from shelf to shelf. So I think the findings is that we need to address the macroeconomic issues. Otherwise, a silo approach will not work. We must bring and connect the strengths of the high, mid, and low-income countries. The mid and low-income countries have young populations. They represent good potential market demand for the high-income countries. They have the youth are technology savvy, Okay, they've got high birth rates. So this is where what we can do is we need to bring these economies together. I have a lot I can talk about, but I'll stop. And I think that was probably, a lot for that.
Well, just something you touched on, you're talking about macro, so, well, what, from your perspective, countries, they have developed digital strategy? Because, well, you're talking about ecosystems that we have to have in place, so, and what made these countries to be successful?
The reality is we look at COVID, we look at the supply chain right now, we are not successful because we've been doing it on a fragmented silo approach. The mother of all industries is the B2B marketplace. The headlines are captured by the B2C. It's very important. But the B2B marketplace is nearly 5 times larger. And what we have right now, if we look at our supply chains, you look at the delays in shipments and all the problems, because the reality is in the supply chain approach or activities, large businesses have done very well creating good vertical integrated systems. But as we know, 50 to 60% of the world's GDP is made up of SMEs. They cannot afford these systems. And even the large companies have small SMEs as their suppliers, and they still input data even with their own systems, they're rekeying data 80% of the time. So the key is creating an ecosystem of the digital B2B marketplace, having a platform where we can move from manual processes, paper-based documentation, to a digital where you're taking and you're integrating the data between all of the different participants in real time. Not a fax, not an email. That's not digital. We're talking about once data goes in through a purchase order and a quotation, that automatically feeds what you need to do the logistics, and it automatically feeds what you need for the banking industry to reduce their KYC and their AML and their risk dealing with Basel III and so on, so the banks can lend more money, so they can have the transparency and visibility, and then for the insurance to insure that risk, to then basically get the transactions concluded.
Well, this seems to be a very sophisticated solution, if you want to implement it across a country, so from your view, who should own that solution?
Sure.
Who should
Absolutely.
take charge of that?
And the key is not one organization can own the solution. We know this situation in terms of the various social media firms and the data privacy and security, and you've got GDPR, and you've got all the rules and regulations. And by the way, our study identified what we call there's the information and document requirements. There's quite a bit that has to do with legal and law, but there's buyer requirement. We call it B-Sci-Fi: buyer, seller, country, industry, finance, and insurance documentation requirements, a lot of which is prescribed by law. It's that information when you bring it together, and we know that not one organization can control all that information. It's the world's B2B. So what our organization has done as a public-private partnership, we've set up a global data security standard, a multi-layered mechanism to ensure the security and privacy of the data. The first two are that you have a governance and ownership structure that involves 4 regional councils, one from the Americas, one from Europe, one from Middle East and Africa, and one from Asia. On the board of each of these 7 regional councils are 7 different country organizations representing the interest of those countries, 28 in total, creating a balanced, a geopolitically balanced governance structure that will own and govern the platform. And then the deployment, not to be done by one technology firm as a single point of failure, or from a geopolitical standpoint, but to have one at the core of the platform that serves as the developer and commercialization of the platform, but have 12 other technology firms, trusted firms that have provided the world systems, 3 from the Americas, 3 from Europe, 3 from Asia, and 3 from the Middle East. And then this organization then provides the tools based on what was defined by the participants at the ground level. They provide these tools to the national banks, to the national insurance firms, to the national e-commerce firms that then distribute it to the national businesses. So then each nation is able to preserve its own individual sovereignty. This is really important in terms of the ecosystem, because of course, data is the currency of the future, and we must protect it.
Well, I see many organizations can play a role in there, and I'm thinking of Louisa when she was talking about, well, what chambers can play and what role they have also in encouraging MSMEs to move towards that, and building the larger ecosystem. Louisa, what would you say in relation to the role of chambers of commerce and industries and in collaboration with the various entities, since basically chambers connect with international organizations, they connect with local government, and basically they represent local businesses?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, I agree very much with what Hashim mentioned about the chambers and the work he's seen them do. Part of what my work on this process has been is building up the capacity of chambers and associations to support SMEs through digital transformation. So as mentioned, in certain countries and regions, the capacity may be quite high, and elsewhere, any efforts to support SMEs to go through digitalization need to be complemented by supporting the capacity of business associations and chambers to, understand the policy environment or offer new digital literacy training programs. So again, it goes back to sort of the ecosystem evolving and building capacity in unison. One thing we've seen that is new and work done by our local partner in Indonesia, the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, is they recommended a co-regulation approach where the business associations and chambers would assist with, co-regulating the policy environment, so that may be related to data privacy or data protection, and be sort of a proactive partner with government so that businesses understand how to self-regulate, and the chambers and associations can contribute to the implementation of that as well as the monitoring of that. This is new. It has not been fully enacted or implemented in Indonesia yet. We see a really important role for chambers and associations, not only in the capacity building areas, either skills or policy, but also supporting businesses' ability to comply with these different regulations. One thing we see is if the regulation is too complex, then you only have the largest firms or the foreign technology firms able to comply. And then the SMEs, switch to an informal process because, let's say, hiring a data compliance officer is simply, prohibitively costly. And so I think having the chambers and associations as a mechanism to communicate between business and government and, work collaboratively to build up the capacity of the overall ecosystem is really essential. And of course, with SMEs, as everyone's mentioned here, they're of all different sizes. They have, whether they be software developers to simple, small goods locally, they have very different needs and very different priorities. And so you need those chambers and associations to help them, identify who they all are and prioritize what the reforms are that they need, both as individual firms, but of course at the ecosystem-wide level. I think it's important for government and the development organizations and agencies to really consider business associations and chambers as partners and engage with them so that business is really playing a key role in the development priorities, from infrastructure to implementing, data privacy laws. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Louisa. It's a very important what you highlighted here with the case study or the example you mentioned. And this is where I want to ask Felipe, because there's an argument of, well, the government should play a role in setting a strategy for digitalization and then try to basically lead and support SMEs or MSMEs into the digitalization. Well, there is the other side of, well, giving autonomy to the business side, and let them decide on the way forward because they are more agile and all of that. So, if, Mr. Felipe, if you can provide us your view of what is the best approach. Well, should the government take a lead, or should be a catalyst or a support for businesses to go forward by themselves?
Yes. In my opinion, the government has to act as quickly as possible to develop the legal ecosystem to support SMEs and in the digitalization process. So to put it in perspective, over 20 years ago, I worked first electronic law issues in the world. It was one of the first laws in the world to address electronic commerce. And all that law did was say that if you have an electronic signature, it is not automatically dismissed. That electronic signature may be as valuable as a wet signature if it's supported, if it's proven to be from the person that signed it. So the law is way behind the technology of all of these organizations. And I think it's imperative that organizations like the Bahrain SME Society, you have to really push the government to develop these laws and push the whole ecosystem. One of the things that Louisa said is that the small enterprises need to be able to adapt to the larger enterprises. If you don't regulate, then the only people that can afford the appropriate electronic means are the large companies. The small companies, they can't afford to hire a data analyst, etc. It might be a 2-3 person company. So it's very important that SME societies push the government and the community to develop the most effective laws, because most of these laws have been developed in order to protect the smaller the smaller enterprise. All of the laws, many laws in commerce related to competition, related to government procurement, related to e-commerce, many of those are put in place to protect the smaller enterprises from the leverage that the much larger enterprises have. So I think it is imperative that SME societies and communities around the world are pushing governments to find the right laws that are affordable, that can be used in the ecosystem, so that the smaller enterprises are protected and supported, so that they can come up with new ideas, start new companies, and go on from there.
Sandrine, from your perspective, with the policy research also you're conducting, what is the best approach to encourage government to improve their laws and policies for SMEs?
What we could see actually is that there is a very large policy consensus across governments on the need to speed the digital transformation of SMEs. But there is a very large leeway on how they do it. And this is actually related to the complexity of this transformation, because you are in front of a very heterogeneous population of SMEs with, to some extent, little in common between the shop next door and the IT startup or the small manufacturing plants. You have very different application of this digital technology according to the sector, the business function that is transforming the industry. And you have also different context, geographical context, economic context. So basically, government are diverging in the way they need to advance on this agenda, in the way they design their policy. Some, for instance, are really much targeting the SMEs, while some others will prefer having a mainstream policy with no specific action for SMEs, but taking into account or keeping in mind the size constraints of the SMEs. So if we want to think in terms of the strategy, well, this strategy should be comprehensive, of course. One of the dimensions should be related to scaling up the SME internal capacity. That's what I explained at the beginning of our discussion. Often SMEs do not have the internal capacity to transform. So they need some technology support and assistance, and they need to access training, upskilling for the workers. They need to, government need to raise awareness about the value of data and how they could better use and protect their data. And they also need to help SMEs raise their digital security profile. There is also a very strong focus on helping SMEs to access some strategic resources. For instance, financing. I mentioned financing as a limitation to the transformation. There are increasingly alternative sources of finance, fintech, for instance, that could be mobilized for helping SMEs to fund the transformation. We discussed about ecosystem, critical. Ecosystem are critical because innovation, firms do not innovate in isolation. So they need connection with suppliers, the market, the business partners. They need connection with the provider of digital solution. They need to be linked, integrated into knowledge network to be able to benefit from these spillovers. They need to access platforms, hubs, interface that could help them test, experiment, and learn about this technology and how they could use this technology in their own settings. And then we need to focus as well on the business environment. We mentioned regulation. Regulation are critical, and also for SMEs to understand the regulation and the law and how they can comply with this regulation. The e-government and e-services could be a very strong lever for this transformation of SMEs. If you remember, I mentioned that in the process of digitalizing, SMEs tend to first digitalize marketing and general administration. And this is seen, for instance, with very close uptake of this technology that allow them to interact with government and public administration. So very small gap between the small and the large firms, meaning that the government itself, by its own transformation, could steer the transformation of the SMEs. As a very concrete example, during the COVID crisis, many governments have put in place platform or try to provide information, health information, but also information about the support that SME could benefit from during the crisis, and they put this information online. And last but not least, when we talk about environment, of course, we talk about infrastructure. And an SME needs to be able to access high quality, high speed infrastructure at affordable prices. So all these elements are the component of a successful strategy for the digitalization of SMEs. But as I talk, we can see that there are many different dimensions, many different ministries that could be involved, as well as different level of governance. I mean, some of this action would be more efficient at national level, and some action would be more efficient at local level. And here, I follow the comments by Louisa about the role of Chamber of Commerce, the role of business association, because these are the actors that very much know their ecosystem, know the conditions, the local conditions, they know their SMEs. So they have a role to play to support these SMEs, also to complement the government action and to work with the government action. And I would push a little bit more, saying that these actors has also a role to play in collecting information about these SMEs and inform government. So overall, what we need is a whole of government approach. A lot of coordination, a lot of exchange, some platform to allow different level of government to interact, and also some platforms to help SME have a voice. And here I would like to mention an initiative by the OECD. It's a Digital for SME initiative. It's a platform where we bring together the SMEs, digital or not. We bring together with government, business association, chamber of commerce. We also bring at the table the large actor of the digital industry. And actually we are sponsored by Amazon, Facebook, and Kakao. And all these actors come together for a dialogue to try to understand how they could help SMEs move forward in the digitalization, in the digital space. I stop here, I spoke too much.
Thank you, Dr. Sandrine. No, it's very informative, and you talked about really a long list of things that needs to be done to support MSMEs to move into the digital space. And there are organizations, in addition to government organizations, so there are so many NGOs like the UNDP and the UNIDO and OECD and many organizations, the CLDP, the SIBE, also the GCL, so there are many organizations really supporting MSMEs. Mr. Stefano, so can you give examples of what support that you can provide to MSMEs to move into the digital space?
Yes, I think that so much was said, and I really could not agree more with the comments made by Sandrine on the complexity. We have to accept the complexity of the actions. They are multi-actor, multi-country, and multi-level, even within a specific government sector, whether it's national, and you need to coordinate institutions at the national level. It's a multi-ministerial effort by definition. It cannot be one ministerial entity just in charge of the whole process of implementing a digital transformation strategy. And we see that in countries that have actually been very successful in these transitions: Singapore, Finland, Estonia, Canada, on different dimensions. So when we provided our technical advice to the government of Bahrain on the digital transformation, we differentiated different areas of intervention that were necessary. Public sector transformation, the use of data and the access, the digitalization of filing systems and of information so that it's data searchable through active searches. This is actually very often overlooked. Just scanning documents doesn't make it data, doesn't make it valuable and efficient in terms of data searches. Also the skills, the lack of skills that exist in countries, this is often overlooked. It's not just about training current workers, it's starting from school, not only university, even before university, at school levels. My kids live in Washington, DC. They study coding in secondary school, sometimes even primary school. Some countries that is unthinkable. What is coding? That's only for software engineers. No, that is the problem. Coding has to become a new language to be spoken even at the primary and secondary school level. Just the basics of coding, just to try to understand how that mechanism works. So, and so on and so forth. Look, what organizations like UNDP can do, we can at least work with governments to appreciate and acknowledge how complex it is and how this requires multiple sectors within the government and outside the government to meet. But more importantly, I think that this is something that Gregory said, and I really agree with that. It's not an effort by a single country to make this progress and to make this shift. countries have to work together. Countries have to learn from each other. There's so many lessons out there, depending on what we are looking in terms of digitalization. There are very, very good practices out there, and OECD puts them together. For some countries, we at UNDP have also a Singapore Center on Innovation, Technology and Sustainable Development. We work a lot precisely on putting together these good practices so that countries that choose to start the transition understand who did it well and how. And let's start talking and seeing which countries are the champions of big data, of coding in schools, and etc. One last thing, Abdullah, that I think was not really mentioned so much. There's an issue of culture of digital transformation. There needs to be a public acceptance that there needs to be a shift. It's not enough to make the legislation ecosystem conducive. Of course, it's key. It's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. There needs to be a shift, like almost like public campaigns to understanding and accepting how there are many, many benefits and fruits and positive elements to gain from by going a digital transformation. But it needs to be regulated. And this is also when you ask what governments should do, governments should have the responsibility to, as a regulator and setting standards, and also, to permeating this knowledge and these concepts at the school level. As I said in the beginning, those are just three elements of it. Over. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Stefan. I was trying to look at my notes. Who said it highlighted about the awareness and the culture, basically? I think it was Louisa, So, if I'm not mistaken,
sorry, Louisa. Didn't hear that. Well, that's key.
So and it is absolutely key, So it's the same question I would like to pose to Mr. Afif in relation to what can be provided to MSMEs, basically to support them towards the digital transformation. And I think that's the last question I will ask the panelists, but then, we've taken a long time from you. So I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions, please post it in the Q&A section. So we just ask our panelists if there is anything. Okay, Mr. Afif.
Let me tell you, I think in some parts of the world, generally the government has to take the lead. And it's not only the government in itself, but it's the whole ecosystem which develops this conducive entrepreneurship, SME development. I heard a lot that, SMEs should, work and improve, and the government has to support them to be able to be part of this global value chain for large companies. There is a role to be played by large companies. Let's be very honest about that. There is a big role that we do not see being played by large companies to support these SMEs. There is no, clear mechanism anywhere, I think, in the world, based on my experience of 25 years of investment, where you have a system where large companies which really go and support these SMEs. SMEs, it's too expensive to get an IT guy for an SME. I'm sure, many of the big, large corporations, they are more than capable to do that. And what we are doing now with the World Free Zone Organization, we launched a program called Future Free Zones, which means all countries around the world are promoting investment, foreign investment, for big flagship companies to come and set up. But the key is, what benefit is this flagship company doing to the local community? Not only creating jobs and spending some money there. There has to be a link between these SMEs and this major company so that they create the real value chain and the replicated effects or positive effects on the free zone, on the large enterprise, and on the SME community. So this is something that we're trying to work on, especially when it comes on our mentorship program, is what we're trying to do to look at small and medium entrepreneurs and link them with major companies in the same line or in a complementary field so that they can create these linkages together. Or else the game will be the same. You have large companies claiming they need, we need. SMEs and the government will say policies do and don't do, and then the SME is stuck wherever they are, with very few, breakthroughs here and there. Awareness, creating awareness. I think, as many people say, Mr. COVID has created this huge shock towards digitalization. I never expected my sons to be studying from their bedrooms, never. And I never believed in it, and I never felt that, they'll be able to be productive or they will be able to learn. One thing I would like to shed some light on and following up on what Stefano was saying, we have developed in Bahrain 2006, together with the Ministry of Education, an entrepreneurship and innovation curriculum that's taught in all Bahraini schools. Since 2018, we started developing entrepreneurship and innovation competitions, achieving the SDGs. So kids at the age of 14 to 17 develop innovative ideas and solutions for the Sustainable Development Goals. COVID came in, we shifted completely virtual. We had doubts that this will work, and it's working absolutely enormous. One of the ideas, 16-year-old, she developed a mobile cover that sanitizes itself and whatever. So we supported her to go globally on the global call that UNIDO did on the corona. You have these things happening. You have these, we're building this, this culture of entrepreneurship, innovation, digitalization. It is there. But there's really much more to be done, and it all depends on the country. In the case of Bahrain, maybe we're very fortunate that most of these things are there. One last point, we're also working with with the Union of Arab Banks on developing a sandbox and a toolbox for commercial banks on how to go digital, because many of these banks are well off money-wise, but they're still lacking the technology they need to adopt. They're still doing trial and error mechanisms. So we're developing that also, which will also support, the SMEs in the Arab region at least, and then eventually the world. This is from my side. Dr. Abdullah.
Well, that's a lot here that you've been doing, Mr. Afif. And to be honest, I've been asked by the MC, well, that's our session reached an end, so I was looking for questions from the attendees, but we don't have anything from them. So, and to be honest, I'm very fortunate, honored to have moderated this session, and I've learned a lot, and there's a lot that to be done, to be honest, and it is a collaborative effort between government, NGOs, small enterprises, as well as large. And we have to really look at the macro picture and also consider everyone in the society. Education, culture has to change to move forward. I really thank you all for all your contribution. And I'm sorry, you didn't have probably enough time to express additional points. And truly, I'm honored and thank you so much. And I'm sure everybody have benefited from your contribution and your feedback. Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was really interesting topics to have today. And unfortunately, the time is moving very fast. I think we come to the end now. I'd like to invite Dr. Abdul Hassan to have the recommendation and the closing of this session. And unfortunately, we are lack of time. Mr. Dr. Abdul Hassan, welcome please to the board. Thank you very much, our guests and participants as well. Thank you.
Dr. Raed and Dr. Abdullah as well, and all the guest speakers, panelists. The session, I think that was really very, very informative, and I wish we could continue with that session as well. But due to the time constraint, and I think we have crossed the time as well. So thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah and the panelists on the session. And also, not to forget His Excellency Ambassador Tawfiq Al-Mansour, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And thanks to the panelists and distinguished speakers as well. His Excellency Ambassador Stefano Bitinato from the UNDP Bahrain, Mr. Afif Barhoumi from the UNIDO Bahrain, Sir Gregory Bird from the GCEL, Ms. Louisa Tomar from SAIB, Dr. Sandrine Kergroch, excuse my misspelling, from OECD, and Dr. James Philby from the CLDB, and to all of you. And I think with this, with the end of day 2, we come to the end of our 9th International UN MSMEs Summit 2021. And we'll be having the recommendations in a minute. At the end of this conference, and before we go to the recommendations, we are glad, and it's our great pleasure to announce the 10th International UN MSMEs Day Summit 2022 on the 27th of June, Monday 27th of June 2022, which is planned to take place at Geneva, Switzerland next year. So you are all invited and most welcome to join us in our 10th anniversary to take place at a lovely city of Geneva at Switzerland, at a lovely country, Switzerland. And we're glad to have with us on board our UNISMO board. Christine is there. Our board member of the UNISMO, Ms. Christine Engvig. Is it Christine there? No? Okay, so anyway, Christine yesterday gave a welcome speech for the next year conference. We convey this message, this welcome invitation and speech for all of you for the next year conference to take place at Geneva, and we'll be communicating with you accordingly for further details. So thank you very much, and thank you for all those who helped us around the clock, whether at the steering committee, at the organizing committee, our distinguished speakers, our partners in the success, the media partners, Al Biladi newspaper, the BMC, where we have this transmission from and broadcasting from the Bahrain Media City, and this really efficient setup. Thank you all, and thanks to our sponsors again, Bahrain Development Bank, the Economic Development Board, and the GBIC, as well as our partners in this success again, Bahrain Chamber of Commerce, the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism, Kingdom of Bahrain, the United Nations office in Bahrain, and the United Nations agencies, the UNDP, the UNIDO, and all our partners in this success. And without any further ado, I think it's the time now to go for our recommendations. And we have 13 recommendations that we came up through these 2 days, yesterday and today, out of the papers presented, speeches, discussions that took place. And I'm glad glad to announce the 13th recommendations, both in Arabic and English, of the 9th. This is the English. So we'll start with the English, and then we'll go to the Arabic, as we started in the beginning with the Arabic and then went to English. So for the end, for the recommendations, we start with the English, reading the 13 recommendations of the 9th annual International UN MSMEs Summit 2021, titled The Importance of Digital Transformation for the MSMEs, the micro, small, and medium enterprises during and post COVID-19 or the pandemic. First of all, emphasizing the importance of celebrating the International Day of Small and Medium Enterprises, International Day of Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises at the highest levels, the necessity of continuing various aspects of financial and technical support, especially for the MSMEs during and after the Corona pandemic, to work on capacity building to raise awareness and provide the owners of the MSMEs and the entrepreneurs with the necessary skills to manage their projects and enterprises using the latest technologies. Number 4, the need to develop a comprehensive strategy to support the digital transformation in order to contribute to the business towards the business continuity and sustainability in various sectors. 5, working on developing a collective emergency or contingency plan in order to confront the expected and face the expected economic crisis post-COVID and prevent the closure of many commercial entities. 6, unifying efforts between the public and the private sectors in order to take collective measures and means to support the national and international economy. 7, develop the legislative and facilitate the digital transformation of the MSMEs. 8, develop a strategy and roadmap to activate electronic commerce, e-commerce, so that the enterprises, the MSMEs, are able to spread and compete globally. 9, adapting laws to be more compatible and flexible for providing training and virtual education in line with the changes imposed by the pandemic, taking into account and consideration the importance of enabling the institutions to take advantage of the investment opportunities available in this field. 10, providing a national electronic base for the MSMEs with the possibility of classifying these enterprises and determining their importance to the economy. 11, conducting a comprehensive study of the sectors expected to grow post the crisis, post the pandemic period, in order to guide the entrepreneurs and investors to amend their plans for their activities or invest in the promising sectors. 12, introducing modern technical solutions to be used at very competitive prices by the SMEs. These solutions are represented in smart work, distance learning, digital health, 3D printing, and artificial intelligence, for examples, few examples. 13, last, launching an initiative to establish a commercial partnership led by the private sector and supported by the government and various development agencies to support the MSMEs going towards innovation and to facilitate access to technology. Thank you very much. So this is in English, and I now switch to Arabic to deliver the recommendations, the 13 recommendations in Arabic. So في نهاية القمة السنوية التاسعة لليوم العالمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة 2021 الذي انطلق من مملكة البحرين من مدينة المنامة مملكة البحرين يومي الأحد والاثنين 27 و28 من شهر يونيو 2021 وبعد استفاضة من النقاشات والأوراق المقدمة من المتحدثين في اليوم الأول والثاني خرج المؤتمر بهذه التوصيات 13 وقد كان عنوان القمة السنوية التاسعة هذا العام أهمية التحول الرقمي في المؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة في ظل جائحة كورونا. أولى هذه التوصيات هو التأكيد على أهمية الاحتفالية باليوم العالمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة وعلى أعلى المستويات. ثانياً، ضرورة مواصلة مختلف أوجه الدعم المالي والتقني خاصة للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة خلال وبعد جائحة كورونا. ثالثاً، العمل على بناء القدرات لرفع مستوى الوعي وإكساب أصحاب المؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة المهارات اللازمة لإدارة مشاريعهم باستخدام أحدث التكنولوجيات. رابعاً، ضرورة وضع استراتيجية شاملة لدعم التحول الرقمي لإسهامه في استمرارية الأعمال واستدامتها في مختلف القطاعات. خامساً، العمل على وضع خطة طوارئ جماعية لمواجهة الأزمة الاقتصادية المتوقعة بعد الانتهاء من جائحة كورونا ومنع إغلاق العديد من الكيانات التجارية. سادساً، توحيد الجهود بين القطاعين العام والخاص من أجل اتخاذ تدابير ووسائل جماعية لدعم الاقتصاد الوطني والدولي. سابعاً، تطوير البيئة التشريعية لتسهيل التحول الرقمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة ومتناهية الصغر والمتوسطة. ثامناً، وضع استراتيجية وخارطة طريق لتفعيل التجارة الإلكترونية بحيث تكون المؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة قادرة على الانتشار والمنافسة عالمياً. تاسعاً، تكييف القوانين لتكون أكثر موائمة ومرونة لتقديم التعليم، لتقديم التدريب والتعليم الافتراضي وبما يتلائم مع المتغيرات التي فرضتها الجائحة، مع الأخذ بعين الاعتبار أهمية تمكين المؤسسات للاستفادة من الفرص الاستثمارية المتاحة في هذا المجال. عاشراً، إيجاد قاعدة إلكترونية وطنية للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة مع إمكانية تصنيف هذه المؤسسات وتوحيد وتحديد أهميتها للاقتصاد الوطني. 11، عمل دراسة شاملة للقطاعات المتوقع نموها لفترة ما بعد الجائحة، وذلك للتيسير على رواد الأعمال والمستثمرين بتعديل خططهم لأنشطتهم، بتعديل خطط العمل لأنشطتهم والاستثمار في القطاعات الواعدة. 12، طرح الحلول التقنية الحديثة لاستخدامها وبأسعار منخفضة، وتتمثل هذه الحلول في العمل الذكي، التعلم عن بعد، الصحة الرقمية، الطباعة ثلاثية الأبعاد، الذكاء الاصطناعي وغيرها من الأمور. 13 وأخيرا، إطلاق مبادرة لتأسيس شراكة تجارية يقودها القطاع الخاص وتدعمها الحكومة ومختلف الجهات التنموية لدعم المؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة نحو الابتكار وتسهيل الحصول على التكنولوجيا نحو التحول الرقمي. بهذا أيها السيدات والسادة نأتي على انتهاء مؤتمرنا السنوي، القمة السنوية التاسعة لليوم العالمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة، والذي كان بعنوان أهمية التحول الرقمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة في ظل جائحة كورونا. شاكرين لكم حضوركم معنا افتراضيا، ومتطلعين إلى حضوركم معنا إن شاء الله العام القادم في أرض جنيف في سويسرا إن شاء الله للنسخة السنوية العاشرة لقمة اليوم العالمي للمؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة 2021. فإلى ذلك الموعد نشكركم جميعا ونسلم عليكم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.